All right, pretty good ambiance in here. Get some Tupac going. Let's get started. All right, so let's talk about structure and how it impacts the achievement gap. So, by definition, quote, by structures, we are referring to operations and procedures such as teacher assessment, course selection and placement, and resource allocation, which profoundly influence the students' experiences at Berkeley High School. So, we understand that BHS is outwardly progressive, but there are puzzling internal struggles that the structure, think student to counselor ratio and processes used to provide academic support to the students that are struggling, that are affecting the huge achievement gap all over the United States. Let's look at the way that structure impacts this gap. So we're going to look at Chantel's case at the beginning of the reading, who she lacks economical, social, and cultural capital and is therefore more susceptible to the impersonal structure of the school. There is no adult available to encourage her to take the classes needed for even the possibility of being prepared for college. Now, we'll visit this lack of influence later, but she's having to retake a class that she took in middle school. They compare her to Jennifer, who, however, came from a private middle school with a, quote, more rigorous academic program. But also she can afford a tutor, and therefore will not fall behind on the track to college, unlike Chantel, who's... sorry. What? Just because Jennifer can afford a tutor, she gets to go to college, but Chantel gets royally screwed over by the public school system because she gets stuck under the radar and doesn't get the proper attention? Isn't that literally the school's job, what they get paid for? No wonder there's an education debt. Speaking of that, let's move on. So, Ladson Billings wants to move away from the gap terminology and start using the word debt. They state, quote, the notion of education debt requires us to think about how all of us, as members of a democratic society, are implicated in creating these achievement disparities. Basically, they're saying to the future president in this particular reading that it's time to stop blaming the student for not pushing themselves, their family for not being able to afford a tutor, and it's time for us, as American citizens, to take responsibility for the debt that we have caused that links all the way back to pre-civil rights and even before then. By the way, Lancet Billings uses the word debt because this inequity within school structure is something that has been around for so long that has created a debt that needs so much funding and other resources that simply addressing a gap will not suffice. So let's go back to Chantel. She is following the path her brother went on while he was at BHS, hence the debt. And now she's simply adding to that debt by taking the same route because no one is encouraging her to do otherwise, hence the structural problem. So critical race theory, how does this connect? I think back to the CRT and education and how Lancet Billings describes the assessment aspect. They say students aren't getting individual attention, so they're performing at lower levels, and then that becomes habitual. It's just so obvious to link Chantel to this in two ways. One, she's not getting individual attention due to the structure of BHS. She's not getting the encouragement. And two, her brother did the same thing, therefore becoming habitual. To go even further by saying this cycle is what is adding to the educational debt. So this all kind of intertwines and leads us to the school to prison pipeline. And I mentioned earlier that we would revisit Chantel's lack of encouragement by school faculty, so here it is. In the TED Talk, Roses in Concrete, Jeff Duncan Andadre, I probably pronounced that wrong, says that he has, quote, started to use the classroom as a space of intervention, end quote. I'm not saying that because Chantel took pre-algebra twice that she'll end up in the school to prison pipeline and get stuck there. But the overall theme here seems to be the lack of influence school faculty has on the students both in and outside of the classroom. So what I ended up with is, if Chantel did have a counselor to encourage her, maybe she would move on to her math course. Maybe she would move on to more of a college track. And if other students did have a counselor, maybe the school to prison pipeline would be less full and more roses would grow in concrete and end up flourishing.